All right, thanks a lot, Rachel, and thanks to Asia Society and Shanghai Restoration Project for having me here tonight. So I want to go ahead and start with a little vote from the audience. The question is, when you see China or you hear the word China, do you immediately think creativity? I want to see a show of hands. Don't think too much about it. This is a purposely vague question. All right, I got some work to do. So in the next 20 to 30 minutes, hopefully I can show you a piece of China right now that I think is really creative and is really paving the way for Chinese creativity. And I want to start with a quick clip from an independent animator based out of Shanghai. His name's Liu Jian, and he really captures the situation that Chinese creatives have right now, this reputation that they're going up against and how they're trying to break through that.
行业的时候，我们说我们是来自中国的动画，但是很多人就讲我们不需要中国的动画。我说为什么？中国的动画代表着廉价、粗糙、劣质，这个可能是对他们的一个印象。然后我会跟他们讲，我说我这是不一样的。可能我讲10个人，可能有2个人他会想一想。 他会来看是不是不一样的，但是大部分可能8个人他不会来看，他认为还是一样的，因为他没见到，他认为不一样的，他见过不一样的中国动画，他见到的就是那样的，他说的那种感觉。但是有2个人来看，看完以后，他会跟我说：“你这个是不一样的。”
So that's a great little clip. That's from a documentary that we just made that covers the Chinese independent animation scene. And I think it really captures this reputation of China as a low-quality, cheap place, and that Chinese creatives are really having to go up against that to kind of make their mark on the world. So I want to take a step back and look at why does China have this reputation of being a place where there's not a lot of innovation. And a lot of times we see images like this. China is this manufacturing base. There's tons of factories pumping out a lot of cheap, low-quality goods. We also see things, a lot of knockoff goods, Gucci sunglasses, Louis Vuitton bags. These are things you can find anywhere in China, and I would also guess anywhere in Chinatown here in New York. We also see some of our most revered American brands. We see Coca-Cola, something that's been around for hundreds of years, and when you walk into a Chinese supermarket, you'll see exact copies of it. So there is a lot of pirating, a lot of knockoffs. And maybe my favorite from earlier in 2011 is an Apple store. If you haven't heard this story, this is in Kunming in Yunnan province. This is not an official Apple store. This was actually created by a very hardworking entrepreneur who replicated the entire store in Kunming because they didn't have one yet, all the way down to these employees' uniforms, the little tag. I mean, I would have been totally duped if I went there myself. So these are kind of some of the images we see. This is the reputation that we get from China. And for the last 6 or 7 years spending my time in China, I've thought, you know, how could a country that is so steeped in cultural history, that has 5,000 years, you know, was really a leading force in China or around the world in promoting creative culture and soft power, how could they go from that beautiful reputation to the one now, which is of cheap and low-quality goods? So I started thinking about that and trying to find my way around the Chinese creative sphere and see, could we find, if we looked a little deeper, some roots of new Chinese creativity and a unique Chinese identity. So typically when we think about creativity, we typically think about places like art galleries. These are the places where, especially now in China for the last 20 years, contemporary Chinese art has really boomed. They're being sold in auction houses for record prices. And yes, there is creativity coming out of there. There's, you know, it's evidenced by the amazing exhibits they have at the Asia Society. But this is actually not the creativity that I want to talk about today. It's also not the creativity that's being done by people like Ai Weiwei. He's someone who has gotten a lot of publicity in the West, especially because he's engaging with the political discourse and really reaching out and challenging a lot of the norms. And while I do think that there is some valid, you know, arguments that can be made there, again, the people that I want you to think about are not these fine artists who are in the galleries. I want you to take you to more of a grassroots level. I want you to think about people like this. This is a self-portrait done by an artist that's part of the creative collective that we run, and his name is Xiaolong Hua. He's both an illustrator and an art teacher, and I think this really captures kind of the blend of influences and different factors that are going into this generation. So you can see, he reads underground Japanese manga comics. He listens to the Beatles down here. He's collecting Transformers. He's on the internet. And at the same time, I know just from working with him, he's incredibly passionate about ancient woodblock Chinese carving. So this is all of the different influences that are coming together on these, what I call creatives. Sometimes I have to differentiate them from artists because people want to block them together into one group. And they're all part of this really interesting generation in China right now that we call the post-80s generation, or 80后. And I think there's a couple factors that are coming together right now that is almost like a perfect storm that is kind of coalescing around this group of 80后creatives and allowing them to make this unique creative culture. The first thing is they grew up in the 80s when China was still a fairly poor place. So they have a lot of that humbleness, hard work that's really helping them out today. At the same time, they've lived through the 1990s and the early part of this century when China's really gained momentum as both an economic force or as a political force. And you see events like the Beijing Olympics or the Shanghai Expo, and this has a profound effect on the psyche of a lot of these creatives. They gain this confidence in China that can be seen in their work, and we'll look at a little bit more of that in a minute. At the same time, they are also the first generation really exposed to the internet. So the internet has been a huge force in really pushing together this creative movement. It's given them access to foreign inspiration and content. It's allowed them to collaborate with some of their peers across China. It's also allowed them to share their work in a place where mainstream media doesn't spend a lot of time on the creative industry. So I want to give you one more quick profile of a post-80s creative. And this is Rayleigh. This also comes from the same documentary. This is a little clip, and I want you to pay attention kind of to how he thinks about the creative process and the independence and the spirit that he has. It really is something that resonates with this whole generation.
所以我觉得动画那不需要，如果一个人做的话，完全不需要那些工业流程去那么繁琐，完全放开，就是你想到哪儿做到哪儿，你有情感马上就用出来。今天想到这样的一个 happy ending， 明天马上就变成一个悲剧，这都特别兴奋。 彩色魔方与乒乓球也是很简单的一个动画，其实也就是在家里打乒乓球的过程嘛。我记得是那一年，我回江西老家，跟我父母就是每天站在下面打乒乓球，我打得很差，然后我父母打得特别好，一个扣杀我就需要跑很远去捡球。 所以后来回来了以后，就想做一个这样的动画，就有可能，比如说我住在这么高的楼层，乒乓球从高楼上掉下去，有可能在找乒乓球的过程中就发生很多有意思的事情，就变成了一段旅行。
So I wish I had time to show you the whole piece. It's one of my favorite animations, and I think it really captures some of these different influences they're having. You can see the kind of the effect of the 1980s with this kind of Game Boy sounds and also, the Rubik's Cube, but it also has this story of him playing ping pong with his grandparents, a very Chinese story. So now we have kind of a sense of the who is creating this kind of grassroots creative culture. Now I kind of want to look at what they're creating and some of the trends that we see. So the first big one that I want to talk about tonight is called neo-traditionalism, which is really just kind of a pretentious way of saying remixing the old with the new. Taking old history, taking old folk tales, especially from China, and remixing them with new modern aesthetics and styles. So right before I walked into the auditorium today, there's this beautiful piece by Huang Yan of the Shanshui painting. Make sure you take a look at it when you go outside on his back. And it's actually one of the things that we see a lot with these new creatives. These are Shanshui paintings. If you're not familiar with them, they're probably one of the most prominent forms of landscape painting in Chinese history. I think the one on the left is from about 950 AD. The one on the right is from about 1050, about Song and Tang dynasty. And now I want to show you kind of how this tradition is being seen today. These are two pieces by a creative or an artist based out of Ningbo. Her name is Shadow Chun. And the one on the right is called Ink Mountain. It's actually an homage to a very famous Shanshui painter named Zhang Daqian. And you can see kind of some modern elements in here. There's a little ladder. And she really wanted to take this old Shanshui style of painting, but then remix it with this new kind of street art aesthetic. And you can see that also on the left-hand painting. This is called Let Go of Her Pearls, which is a story about a princess who collects flower petals. And I just love the psychedelic kind of liquid formations that are put into this very Shanshui style. Another good example of this is two pieces by an artist named Zhu Jianhang. He's based out of Wuxi in Jiangsu. And again, just like Shadow Chen, he's taking the same style, but he's taking a brand new modern approach to it. This is all done in Photoshop, all digital. He's putting together collages of pictures, photographs mixed in with digital illustrations, and these bright, beautiful neon colors mixed in with old Chinese calligraphy. So I think I love these two pieces. And lastly, I want to show you another example of Shanshui that comes from the streets. So this is from Moganshanlu, the kind of graffiti area in Shanghai. And this is a piece done by Sale. Obviously not done for a gallery. This is done just on his own accord. And he's, again, capturing the same Shanshui style, but using new Western art forms, this graffiti. So that's a quick overview of how Shanshui is doing. If you guys don't know this, this is Journey to the West, one of the famous epics of Chinese literature. And the main character, one of my favorite characters of all time, is the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. People who are familiar with Chinese history obviously know who he is. He's a very mischievous little guy. He's always getting into trouble. He can change his body into 72 different formations. He's just a really fun character to read about. And these are two paintings. Actually, this one on the left is from the Summer Palace in Beijing, so if you go there, you can see it. This is another ancient piece. And this has been another one of these stories where the modern creatives are grabbing on to that tradition and then remixing it into a new style. So two examples here. This is done by an artist named Bill Wei. He's from Guilin. And this one on the right is done by an artist named Nod Young. The interesting thing about both of these pieces is not only are they grabbing the Journey to the West story and the character of Sun Wukong, they're also using a Chinese paper cut style. You can especially see it here with Nod's work. It's obviously a very traditional way of cutting paper and that you see throughout Chinese history. This one is not so obvious, but it's done in this very graphic, almost comic book style. This piece is done by two people in Shanghai, Rubber Pixie and Messland. Obviously, that's their artist names. And they worked on this together at the same time over 3 days. And on each side, this is Rubber Pixie, this is Messland. These were their individual interpretations of the Monkey King. So very different looks, but obviously with a very modern feel, a very kind of aggressive, edgy side to it. So these are kind of some of the traditions that are getting remixed today. I could go on forever with them, but I need to move on to some other pieces. What I want to talk about for a minute is just because these people don't exist in the galleries, they need to find other ways to support their career, to support their talent. So what we're doing with my organization is we match them up with a lot of brands, and we try to create really interesting content that can mix the new and old and also appeal to consumers. So this piece is also done by the same artist, Nod Young. And just to give you a sense of how kind of grassroots he is, he was actually a power plant technician for a long time and would just do graphic design and illustration on the side until one day, he's like, I'm going to, jump off the edge of the cliff and really try to make a career for myself. So he's been doing really well, and we've been trying to help him in that endeavor. This is a great piece that we did for Nike, and I think you guys are far enough back. If you kind of squint your eyes, it actually is in the shape of a Beijing opera mask. I don't know if you can kind of see that shape. And there's a lot of elements in here that are really interesting and tell little stories about China. We've got the Forbidden City up here. We've got 8 different runners. 8 is obviously the lucky number in Chinese. We've got these silk ribbons and clouds, which are actually an homage to the flying Asparas, this Buddhist deity of swiftness and gracefulness, which comes through in this piece. We also have here these two runners. They actually are not going back to kind of more traditional China, but to the kind of communist era of propaganda, so he's mixing a little bit of that in there. So he can create a piece like this. It can then be translated to a more consumer-facing realm. So for this one, we made this limited edition pair of shoes and also a shirt. And with that, he's able to sustain his career and really keep going. One other quick piece that I wanted to show, this is, because it is the Year of the Dragon, this is something done by an artist that we did called, it doesn't have a name, but his name is Keizeng. And he's a really interesting artist because he only uses 3 colors. I've actually never asked him why, but it's quite effective. He uses this cyan, red, and orange. And I just love this kind of graphically infused modern dragon that he made. And again, for this, we're able to apply it to really interesting formats. We've got the Oakley logo treatment, and then also we did this limited edition pair of glasses. So the last project that I want to kind of talk about is something I'm working on right now. I'm really excited about it, and it's something that I've had a dream about for kind of the last 2 years, and we're really starting to move on it. And it's a project called Chengyu. So Chengyu, if you're not familiar, is a Chinese idioms. Basically, in English, we have these, a wolf in sheep's clothing, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. And it's these kind of little phrases that on first glance might be kind of unintelligible, but if you get to know the story behind them, if you get to know the metaphor, they give you life lessons, they give you, teach you about morality, or a lot of times we use them kind of as just witty retorts in conversation. So I just love how you have to kind of dig into them to know the feeling, and then you can use them in really interesting situations. And in Chinese, there's over 20,000 of these. So there's this, I would just, as I was learning Chinese, I was fascinated by them, and there's this huge library, and I was like, wow, we really need to celebrate these on a wider scale. I want, the young generation in China to really celebrate these, and I think the way that we could do it is we could reinterpret them with a visual style, a very modern style. So far, we've put together a collection of 20 of these. We're hoping to expand that to about 50 or 100. So I want to show you a couple real quick. This first one, the Chengyu, if you can't read it over here, is Bang Bing Sheng Zhu. And for each artist, we had them do 2 interpretations. They did a typography interpretation, so the 4 characters they remixed, and then also they did a visual interpretation of the actual meaning of the Chengyu. So the meaning of the Chengyu literally for this one is a sick clam births a pearl, or something like that. And basically the metaphor is in life, a clam has to kind of eat all this gritty sand until they can finally, give birth to this beautiful pearl. And how that relates to our everyday lives is we have to go through a lot of hardships before we're able to discover something new and create something beautiful. So this piece is done by someone, a Chinese-based illustrator named Momo. And I love how she took, on the calligraphy side, on this typography side, she took kind of an ancient form of Chinese calligraphy, but then did it in a very graphic form. She has these very geometric shapes over here with these bright kind of neon colors. This second one is called Kou Ruo Xunhe, and the literal translation is a mouth like a waterfall. You can probably guess the meaning of this. If your friends are rattling on and talking too much, this is a good one to throw at them, or your Chinese friends, they'll get it real quick. And so for this piece, the artist Kuzi, again, artist name, basically tried to interpret this very much with the feeling of water coming out of somebody's mouth, and I love how they integrated that water feeling into the typography here. Third one that I want to show is called Xiang Ru Yi Mo. And this has a really interesting story in China. The literal translation is not the best sounding. It's to moisten each other with spit. There's actually a romantic story to this, so just give me a second here. There's a Chinese folktale about 2 fish who find themselves washed up on the side of a lake or a river, and they can't get back into the water, so they're dying. And they just have the kind of moisture that's left on their bodies. So they rub up against each other, and they're trying to give each other, their spit and their moisture to help each other out. And the metaphor is really one of altruism. Even if you don't have the resources to help somebody out, you should do anything in your basically that you can to help them out. So for this interpretation, Lulu, who's based out of Guilin, chose to do a mermaid, and I think this is a merman, and she chose to interpret them up on this dry, sandy shore where they're drying up in the sun, while in the ocean, there's this beautiful coral reef that's going on like nothing happened. And the last one I want to show tonight is called He Li Ji Chuan. This literally means a crane among chickens. And you can kind of see that over here with the visual interpretation. I love how this guy's wearing a classy black jacket. And they're all kind of these anthropomorphic characters. So the artist chose not to actually put chickens, but she turned them into half people, which I think was really interesting. And I love this one also because it kind of captures, when I look at the creative scene and I look at some of these kids who are doing such amazing work, I think of them as really standing kind of heads above some of their peers. So these are a couple of examples from this project called Chengyu. We're working on it now. We're actually trying to find a publisher, so if you know anybody, please come and talk to me. So I want to end with one quick metaphor. And this is something that the co-founder of my company told me. He's from Shanghai. And we have conversations every day about creative culture in China and how do we build a creative industry and all these things. And he said, when I look back at Chinese history, I think of it as this beautiful tree. It's got these branches and leaves and all these different kind of cultural influences. And unfortunately, with the Cultural Revolution, it was cut off. We lost our connection to so many things of the past. And it was such a tragedy because there was so much to draw from. And so really what we're trying to do is find a way, to pick up a lot of those pieces, to use some of the modern influences we have now, and really create a creative culture that China can call its own. So with that, thank you very much. And I think we have maybe 5 minutes or so for questions, if there's any questions from the audience. And I think Rachel has a microphone.
How did you get interested in all?
So I'm half Chinese. My father is Hakka Chinese, and while I grew up in the U.S., I was always interested in going to China and kind of exploring that side of my family. I went there to study abroad in college, kind of fell in love with the country. And then I've always been really interested in the arts and music, but especially kind of this independent grassroots arts. And so I just started seeking out these people that were doing really interesting things. I found that there was a lot of creativity, but nobody was really paying a lot of attention to it. People weren't connecting, various creatives. So myself and a couple other people built a social networking site so people could upload their content, they could talk to each other and really show off creativity. Over time, we realized that we had to actually make money to stay alive, and the social networking site wasn't doing a very good job of that. So luckily, we came across a really nice business model where we're able to create a lot of this content, but we use this database of, it's about 400 to 500 kind of premier artists that we work with, and then we work with brands to kind of create different content for them. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Maybe use the mic. Yeah.
Are some of these pieces available sort of mass market, or are they more fine art collectible types, or even available to be looked at by people in America?
Yeah. So one thing, you can go to this site. That's our website. Actually, we run it mostly as a web magazine, just showing this stuff off every single day, and it's bilingual. So everything we show on there, I mean, our audience is 70% Chinese because we're appealing to this community. But we also our goal and our mission is celebrating Chinese creativity. So we want to bring it to the rest of the world. That's why it's great to see so many people here. And in terms of as collectibles, this is not art that you find in the galleries. A lot of people call it, a lot of times it's more referred to as kind of emerging art, commercial art. lowbrow art, sometimes we call it. Actually what we're trying to do this year, one of our projects, is to build a store so that we can deliver prints and people can buy these things. That helps support the artist, and it helps people who are interested in this kind of artwork get a handle of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just curious, with all the art that you have, will you be branching out into international licensing for some of the properties? Because I can see a lot of the artists, they could definitely showcase their stuff at the International Licensing Show and the International Art Show.
Yeah, we love to find any of those opportunities to help the artists, to help our company kind of get the word out. I'm not familiar exactly with these licensing shows. Sounds like I would love to hear about it. But yeah, typically when I show this stuff in the US, people do find it somewhat appealing. People do think that it's interesting stuff, even though you wouldn't find it in a gallery. So we're trying to find any channel we can to kind of get that out there. I think maybe there's one in the back. Yeah, maybe shout it out and I'll repeat the question. Yeah.
You asked us at the beginning our perceptions of Chinese creativity. You got a few hands and a lot of blank faces.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what would it be if you asked that question in China? How do they perceive their own creativity and in that sense?
Yeah. Real quick, the question was just, I asked at the beginning, do you perceive China as creative? And what would be the answer to that in China? It's a really good question. I think a lot of people in China are also not exposed and haven't seen a lot of this kind of stuff. Just because the creative industry is so nascent in China, it's still just getting its feet up. The government is actually doing a pretty good job of supporting it. But the biggest problem I find in China is just the media doesn't pay a lot of attention to it. The media is pretty much state-owned. So to find this kind of stuff, you really have to go to the internet. And a lot of people aren't exposed to it. At the same time, a lot of China is still very much thinking about, working their farm or making enough money and really, taking care of their family. So this kind of stuff isn't something that they're necessarily top of mind to them. So I think the quick answer to your question is probably they would, vote the same way that you did. They would remember kind of maybe ancient China creativity, but they wouldn't think about kind of this new form of creativity that we're seeing. Yeah.
Do you think with the regulation of the internet in China that hinders a lot of these artists from actually getting out more, or they don't have a chance to start?
Yeah.
Especially media.
Yeah. So the question was, with the recent regulation of the internet, is that going to hinder these Chinese artists? And there has been, the last year or two hasn't been great. If you want to go on the internet in China, a lot of stuff is getting shut down. But with these artists, I tried to make a quick differentiation between kind of the fine artists in China and what I see as these kind of what I call creatives. And for the most part, these creatives aren't interested in political topics. So they're not creating any content that would be controversial in the first place. So censorship is not something that they would even come up against. In the fine art realm, the Ai Weiweis, they're going to get into trouble because they're engaging in that kind of political discourse. But I find for a lot of the creatives that we work with, they're mostly interested in creating kind of positive, optimistic works that and building their career. They want to build a career for themselves. And they're generally pretty happy with how China has evolved over the last 25 years in terms of improving, living standards. So they don't have too many arguments against the Chinese government that would then, play into censorship.